Hey all, welcome back. In this episode, we are going to take a look at making parameters, which are a really powerful tool in Tableau, but a little bit tricky until you get used to using them. So a parameter in our application is going to be a drop-down that sits over here. And we'll be able to click from our drop-down, we'll be able to choose whether we want to look at backcountry campers, concession or camping, concession or lodging. Because right now, or any of these, right now what we have is a series of pretty decent visualizations that are based on recreation hours, or this should have actually been recreation visits. Pardon my editing. Yours is probably fine. And I might not always want to look at recreation visits. I mean, that's fine, but if you're trying to plan a trip or think about where you might want to go, you'd be interested in a variety of variables, not just recreation visits. And I don't want to have to make this series of charts 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever, however many times. You get the idea. So let's make ourselves a drop-down menu, and when we choose from one variable to the other, our chart will update. Okay, so making a parameter is really a two-piece thing. First, we make the parameter itself, which is going to be our drop-down menu. And then we've got to make a new calculated field, a variable, that links our parameter to these variables. Before we get started, make sure to save what you've got. And then let's start with the parameter. Parameters in the corresponding calculated field are a little bit labor intensive, and it's not a good time to lose your work. So we'll save a couple of times along this process so that you don't run into trouble. So from anywhere, right, we're going to do create a parameter. I just right-clicked in the data section. So the name of the parameter is what's going to show up here. We've got region, year, season. What do I want to show at the top of my drop-down? I want it to say, select a variable. This next two sections, you're just going to sort of have to take my word for it, but we're going to switch from float to string. It's because we're getting it to recognize strings, which are these words. And allowable values will be whatever we say are allowable values. And we're going to take the ones of these that play well with each other, like have the same scale, et cetera, et cetera. But let's start and type it in exactly as you see it. Backcountry campers. Spelling counts. You got to get this just right. If you mess up, you can fix it later, but it's a pain. Backcountry campers. Concession or camping. I'm just going to list these variables one by one. Concession or lodging. Then I'm going to do recreation hours. Recreation hours per visit. Recreation visits. RV campers. Tent campers. And total overnight stays. Check for typos. You can come back and edit any of these by double-clicking if you find a problem. And you can remove rows if you want to later, but we've made the parameter. Once we've made the parameter, from our drop-down, we want to show it. So here's what it looks like. Let's drag this to the top. Selecting the variable will be the first thing. Then you can restrict to your region and then the year if you want. So what I want to happen is I select the variable I'm interested in looking at. So if I want to look at tent campers, I select tent campers and this updates. So the second part of making a parameter is creating a calculated field that links the parameter to the variables of interest and tells Tableau what we want it to show. So our next step is to create calculated field. And if this says select a variable, I'm going to label this calculated field variable. The first command in this code is case. And the case is the name of your parameter, select a variable, right? That's mine. So the case is select a variable. All right, so now we're going to say when, and now it knows that we're referring to this parameter. So start here. When backcountry campers, right? So when backcountry campers is selected, then we want the variable backcountry campers to be included in the visualization. But in front of that term, backcountry campers, we need to select sum. Well, that was an inelegant way of doing this, sum of backcountry campers. Close my parentheses. Let's do this again. And then when, from our parameter drop-down menu, right, when it says concessioner camping, then we want Tableau to give us the sum of the variable concessioner camping. Great. When it says concessioner lodging, then we want it to be the sum of concessioner lodging. When it says recreation hours, then we want it to return the sum of recreation hours. When it says recreation hours per visit, I want to pause for a second because then we want it to return not the sum, but the average of recreation hours per visit. Keep an eye on your capitalization, your typing. It all is going to matter making it work. The words in the quotation marks here have to match the words in this drop-down menu exactly. So if there's a typo in either one of these places, it won't work. It's relatively easily fixed, but it's an extra step. Then we've got when recreation visits, then sum of recreation visits. When RV campers, then sum of RV campers. When tent campers, then sum tent campers. When total overnight stays, then sum total overnight stays. The end. You gotta end it. Whew, that's quite a lot of code there, but give yourself a chance to make sure that your case matches the name of your parameter and that the labels, just eyeball them to make sure they match the variables as entered in the parameter. And then we have sum of all the fields except for recreation visits, hours per visit, because we want average. And then the calculation is valid, which is fantastic. And then let's say OK. Let's return to our very first tab, trend. And we're going to have to show the parameter on any sheet we want to use it. So Our field in the rows shelf is the sum of recreation visits. But now we have a new variable called variable, right, with that long code, and it's linked to the parameter. So I'm going to remove recreation visits, and I'm going to replace it with variable. And now, look, I've got tent campers. I can change this. Let's just kind of go through some of these. Let's start with recreation visits. And it's got us scrolling here. So let's switch from standard to fit width so we don't have to scroll. Recreation visits, like we saw before, increasing over time with a dip for COVID. But let's take a look at recreation hours. Recreation hours is increasing too, sort of, right? But just not as dramatically. Again, we see a dip for COVID. Then we can look at some of the other options, like what about total overnight stays? Total overnight stays within national parks has been declining a little bit. There was a dip for COVID, but it still seems like it's on a declining trend, where 9 million people, 9.2 million spent the night in national parks in 2023, down from a high in 1992 when 11 million people stayed overnight. And then we can look at different types of overnight stays, like backcountry camping. Backcountry camping is increasing. Seems to be on an upward trajectory. People are using those backcountry campgrounds. Well, what about other tent site campgrounds? Other tent site campgrounds have been, people are decreasing. We can look at all of these, right? And we don't have to change anything other than this. We now essentially have an entire set of visualizations for each variable. On our seasonality tab, we just have to show the parameter there and then remove recreation visits and swap it out with variable. So RV campers seem to be kind of on an upward trend over the last 5 years, but how do they look for our total trend? Decline in RV camping in national parks. Although the last few years, you can see here it's sort of held stable, and we can see that here when we look at it by month. What about in visits, hours, and distance? We're going to leave that one alone, although we could play with it, but it's not one that we really just want to swap these out because we could only swap one of them out. I mean, I guess we could. Let's do parks and season first, though. So parks and season, we've got sum of recreation visits for each season, and this we would use to understand, in whatever region, what month people are traveling or what national parks people are visiting. So if we're looking among the Pacific West in 2023 and we're thinking where one might go over spring break, we can see that Death Valley, Haleakala, Joshua Tree, some of those are really popular destinations. But what if we don't want to only look at recreation visits? What if we're thinking instead that we want to look at any one of those variables? So again, we'll drag out recreation visits and we'll drag in variable. I'm going to have to adjust this axis again, unfortunately. We'll remove the title variable and we'll allow an independent axis range for each row or column. And then lots of these places have 0. So, well, we can deal with that here. Take a variable into filter. What we're going to do is we're going to show that I want there to be at least one entry for it to be included. So then we should see, if there's no RV camping, like you can't RV camp on Channel Islands because you have to get there by boat. But what's only going to show parks for which there are RV campers. So if we want to RV camp in March, Death Valley, Joshua Tree, right? Not Hawaii. You can only RV camp there in December. You get the idea. So this would allow us to rotate through the different fields based on interest. Okay. So now that we've got these variables and we've got our parameter in, there are endless more things we can do. But that at least gets us through what we covered in lecture today. And I'll be coming back to show you what to do or how to get some of that map data in. All right, happy visualizing, and I will talk to you soon.